It's one of the things that makes the world go round, and it's played a very important role in my life in the sense that I was always trying to wrestle with what does make the world work, the way the world go round. And I had done lots of economics in high school, so I carried that on in university, and I decided if you follow the money, that explains quite a lot about what goes on in the world. Not everything, psychology, anthropology, religion, they all have their role, but I've in particular followed the money.
The capitalist, consumerist culture, do you feel that's inconsistent with the Christian worldview?
Not at all. The gospel imperatives and elsewhere in the Bible tells us a lot, and in fact our Christian faith and our theology underpins very, very strong values that should be the underpinning of that capitalism in those economic systems, and then the systems work well. The problem arises when the systems and the way people use them start to drift away from that, and that's when an awful lot of damage and destruction is done, as we see now.
In terms of the gospel, comments such as the love of money being the root of all kinds of evil, or the difference between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of mammon, there's quite a contrast in the ways of the world compared to the ways of the kingdom.
Yes. I'm always really worried when I find people or institutions that are in love with the money, and it's that love of the money distorts all their other judgments. So that would be my very straightforward response to that. And similarly, Mammon is just taking a broader view of that money and the values that surround it. And again, if those are the dominant values, then they become very destructive. So it's a question of making sure that money, which is a very useful thing, economic systems, financial systems, which are again very useful, if they are underpinned by very good principle, and this doesn't necessarily need to be Christian, and we can easily align that, but that's the essential thing which we're losing track of.
I suppose two different takes on this: aspiring to have a better life for you and your family, which can be a very good thing, versus the he who dies with the most toys wins model. How do you balance those?
I think that anybody who is buying into the latter is leading a very impoverished life, because you tend to see those people so focused on that they're neglecting relationships and wealth in the far richer and broader sense. So wanting to do better for yourself, for your family, for your community, for the world, is a very admirable thing to do. We're talking about trying to progress, trying to lift people out of poverty, trying to educate more people, help people live longer. So as long as you are working within that context, which, whilst there is some selfish sense of this is about me and my family, but it's also about very conscious of the social context in which you're doing that, then you can achieve a great deal more.
In terms of moral failings, now whether or not this is London banks or finance companies in New Zealand, is it more than just individual moral failings? It's just a few bad apples, as it were, a few people that have gone off the rails? Or is there an aspect whereby this greed is good mentality is what actually makes the system works? For people that are wanting to acquire more, for a system which tells them that if they don't have it, they deserve it and should borrow the money to get it. And in order for the wheels to keep spinning, there needs to be almost this principle of greed that makes it spin.
This is a collective failure. So yes, there have been some very notable people through this period over, say, the last recent decades that have exploited that to the full. But it is a collective breakdown. So it's within the culture of whole institutions, obviously influenced by some very forceful individuals. at the top of them, but it's within institutions, financial institutions. It's within the regulatory framework. It's within the political system that's allowed that to happen. But it's also we've got to accept responsibility for that. So in society, we were enjoying the huge tsunami of credit that was this unleashed in the world, and we thought this was wonderful. We could, house prices were rising, so we'd go out and remortgage the house so we could sort of buy a boat and put a down payment on a batch. We thought it was pretty wonderful, and so lots of people, got sucked into that. So it is very much a collective responsibility, and for me, one of the interesting and encouraging signs of some change is the behaviour that's either being forced on people or they're willingly accepting it. So in New Zealand, household debt, net debt, assets minus what you owe, net debt as a percentage of disposable income in New Zealand went from 90% in 1992 to 160% in 2007. Our households in New Zealand became the third most indebted in the developed world. So that we got pretty crazy about that. Now we are managing to kind of work back from that without crashing the economy, as we're seeing elsewhere in the world. And so our household behaviour has changed really quite significantly in New Zealand over the last 2 or 3 years. People are far more conscious about living within their income and getting back to saving as opposed to dis-saving, taking on debt. And so that return to some pretty basic fundamentals about finance in people's behaviour is good. Now, arguably there's still a ways to go on that, but we have turned some kind of corner.
In terms of our own response to our money and our finances, maybe easy to point the fingers at the economists and the bankers, etc. But is there a way, as people of faith, that we should respond to money generally? Is there a way in which we should model that as part of the society in which we live?
Yes. And I would pick up on a number of elements. The first one is that money is by far the best way we've devised so far as a way of exchanging value with each other and transmitting that value from here to somewhere else or over time, and helping us to multiply up what we do. So money is important, but it must never dominate. It must always be seen as one of the things we're working with to achieve something much bigger. The second concept is money, a sum of money has two owners. It has the individual who earned that money or saved that money, but that money is also owned by society, because if it's not, if society breaks down and devalues that money, then that money becomes valueless. So we need to think very carefully about, yes, this is my money or it's our money, if it's a church, a family, or a country, it is our money, but there is that other much broader ownership of that money. Because if we don't get things right around that broader context, then society becomes dysfunctional and that money becomes valueless. And so for me, that's one way of understanding or trying to, what's a bedrock principle here as to how money should be acquired and used. I think trying to see it in that sort of dual ownership helps you think through what's the best way to use that money.